Welcome into this NBA draft recap. Today, I'm going to be breaking down everything that happened for the San Antonio Spurs in the 2024 NBA draft the last couple nights. Before I get into the video, make sure if you're new to this channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment. Any interaction at all really helps our channel, helps us grow, so we greatly appreciate it. With that said, let's jump into all things San Antonio Spurs. We got a lot to talk about. We'll start with the good of the NBA draft, and the good was obviously the number 4 overall pick, and that's Stefan Castle. So the Spurs picking at number 4 and number 8 overall in the first round, and there was some talk that the Spurs may go Reed Sheppard at 4 if he's still there. I'm very glad he wasn't, because I think Castle has way more upside than Reed Sheppard. I'll get into Reed Sheppard in a separate video when I'm talking about the entirety of the draft. But let's focus on Castle at first. He comes over from UConn, played 1 year there. He was injured to start the season for the Huskies. Came in, played a couple games coming off the bench, quickly came into the starting lineup after a couple games, and became a key centerpiece to them getting all the way to and winning the national title ultimately. And he did so mainly on the defensive end. And that's not to say he's not good offensively, but defense is where he's going to make his money, especially early in his time in San Antonio. I mean, this guy was an elite defender at the collegiate level. One of the best on-ball perimeter defenders I've seen in college in a long time, especially as a freshman, right? Has a little bit of Kawhi Leonard-like feeling to him in that sense. Not the greatest offensive player, phenomenal defense, pretty good athlete, but if you watched him play defense in college, he almost every night guarded the best player for the opposing team. And the one performance that stood out to me above all else was the Elite Eight performance he put on defensively guarding Trae Shannon Jr. Trae Shannon Jr. was averaging, I believe, 23 a game in the regular season, over 23 a game. He was averaging close to 28 a game in the first 3 tournament games. He looked to be unstoppable. He was a force getting to the rim, was shooting it well. I mean, just scoring at will, pretty much just doing whatever he wanted on the offensive end. He was a menace. And what happened in that Elite Eight game, he was absolutely shut down by Stefan Castle. I mean, what he did to him was beyond impressive. I was thoroughly impressed with Stefan Castle. That's what made it real for me. It's like, okay, I think he's a really good defender, but now we see it in this big game, and we see him do it against one of the best, if not the best, offensive player in college basketball last year, on the perimeter at least, and he shuts him down. I think Shannon finished with 8 points. Most of them were late in the game when it was already at hand. It was never close, and it was largely because Castle took away Trae Shannon Jr. You look at him from a physical standpoint, right? 6'6" guard. He's got some ability to handle the ball. Really good cutter, slasher, and I think one thing I noticed, super high IQ. Like that a lot about him. He's very aware on the floor, knows where to be, knows when to cut. Smart, cerebral guy. Where he's got to improve is shooting, for sure. I mean, that's the number one thing. He was a 27% three-point shooter last year. He showed the ability to knock down threes at times. His mechanics in general don't look too bad, right? He was, in the high 70s from the free throw line, which is a good sign. So his mechanics aren't bad, but he's got to work at that. That's going to be a huge part of his improvement. If the Spurs can teach him to shoot the ball consistently and he becomes a 37-38% three-point shooter, right, in 4 or 5 years, I mean, that's when this guy could be really elite and end up being one of the best, if not the best player in this class. So I love the pick. I thought it's a great fit in San Antonio. Obviously, the Spurs really struggled defensively as a whole, as a team, but specifically perimeter defense, right? Like Wemby was great at the rim, protecting the rim, and he's going to be a defensive player of the year, multi-time defensive player of the year. And we just could not stay in front of people on the perimeter. So this is really an important need to address. Now, he's young, right? 19 years old. He's not short, right? He's a legitimate 6'6" guard. And so I like him a lot there. I think also another area to improve at is going to be finding ways to improve his explosiveness off the catch and attack, right? So like in jab situations, in face-up one-on-one, he's not the quickest guy, right? Like he'll go by you. He's crafty. He's smart. And he's got some explosion at the rim. But if you watch his first step going by people and trying to blow by guys, it's not quite there. So that's an area of improvement as well. But overall, love the pick. Now we get to the bad. And this has been a big topic of debate among Spurs fans so far since the draft. I was extremely critical of it on the first night of the draft. I've come to accept it a little bit more. I like a little bit of what we did in the second round, so I'm not going to be overly critical of this pick, or of this decision, rather. But essentially, the Spurs have the 8th overall pick, right? You have a couple guys sitting there who I thought would have been good fits, one of which is the guy we initially drafted, which was Rob Dillingham. I like Rob Dillingham. We'll get into him in a second. I thought Dalton Knecht was the best available player. A lot of people had him, top 5 on their boards. I had him top 5 on my board. I get it. He's older, right? 23 or 22 years old. That's part of what GMs factor in nowadays. I think it's less important. But regardless, the Spurs draft Dillingham and proceed to immediately trade the pick to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, that is the bad part, right? Like, we're trying to build a young team. We have 2 top 10 picks. You have 2 guys on the board right there that could be impactful players in the near future. And rather than taking and keeping one of them, you trade the pick. I don't like that move in general, right? But then you add in the fact of what they got. And it's just so crazy that this was the trade. And I'm going to get into why I think they did it in a second. But they trade Rob Dillingham for a 2031 first-round unprotected pick and a 2030 draft swap in the first round, pick swap. So they don't get anything back in the now, in the current, right? They don't get, Minnesota had the 27th pick. They don't get that. They just get future pick and a future pick swap. That's it, right? I don't know if we've ever seen something like this before. Trading a top 10 pick in order to, or with no players involved, right? No players and no current picks or like next year picks, right? Like if you trade, okay, you've got the 8th pick, you got a team who's not very good. They offer you, their 10th pick this year and a first rounder in 2 years. Okay, right? Like makes sense. Okay, they're moving up. You're going to get something back. But to give away a guy who could be an impactful player for you for that little, that's ugly to me. And it looked like, and I don't know, I'm not in the war room. I'm not going to act like I'm a GM, but it looked like when they showed the Spurs war room that it was a panic. I think that the Charlotte Hornets stunned them and took their guy at number 6, and the Spurs were left trying to figure out what to do. They didn't want to take Dillingham or Knecht. They didn't like Cody Williams anymore like they did earlier in the season, and now all of a sudden they're stuck, and they have to all of a sudden find a way to deal this pick, and this was the best they could get. I want to look at it real quick from a perspective of salary cap, right? So the 8th overall pick in this draft is going to make $28.4 million over 4 years. That's their rookie contract. So an average of 7.1 a year. The first year would be somewhere around $6.5 million. So then let's look at the Spurs payroll right now. Okay, current payroll. We've got Sidy Cissoko on a 3-year, $5.3 million contract. He's making $1.9 this year. Charles Bassey on a 4-year, $10 million contract, $2.5 this year. Blake Wesley on a 4-year, $12.2 million contract, making $3 this year. And Malachi Branham, 4-year, $14.1, $3.5 million this year. Okay, so you have 4 guys who, if you're not a diehard Spurs fan, you might know one of those guys, right? Like Charles Bassey played a decent amount early in the year, and Malachi Branham played more than probably any of those guys over the course of the season. Sidy Cissoko we drafted in the 2nd round last year, and Blake Wesley has been on the team for, I believe, 2 or 3 seasons, and he was a second round pick who hasn't done much. I'll put it that way. So looking at those guys, right? Just those guys, just those four. Okay. We have guys who none of which are going to be pieces of a championship roster, of a contending roster, right? Going forward, there's no way in the world the Spurs could possibly think that any of those guys, Wesley, Branham, Bassie, Sissoko, or any of them are going to be pieces of a roster when we are contending, however long along the road that might be, right? With that said, think about these two things. This is what was crazy to me when I really went in and dug into this. Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham both were on team options going into this 24-25 season, meaning the Spurs had the option to keep him or cut him, right? They could set him loose, let him go into free agency, or they could take the team option for a cheap amount of money and keep him for another year. They picked up both those options, Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley, right? Add up their salaries for this year. What do you get? $6.5 million. What is Rob Dillingham's salary this year if we keep him? $6.5 million. So from the perspective of, he kept hearing the argument, we're freeing up cap space, right? We're freeing up cap space to be able to get guys next year. Why would you, if you had the option of keeping two guys who you know will never possibly be pieces of a contending roster, why would you keep them when you have the ability to get a young guy, an electric scorer in Rob Dillingham, a guy who averaged 15 points per game in 23 minutes a game, off the bench, mind you, for Kentucky, shot 45% from three, or Dalton Knecht, who I thought would have been better, who was the best scorer in college basketball. I understand, scoring and things like that don't always translate directly to the NBA, but their skill sets fit what the Spurs need. They need guards who can score, right? Knecht's more of a wing, but like guys who can score off the dribble and create their own shots. Both of those guys do that extremely well, right? Better than probably anybody in this draft. Those are probably the best two one-on-one scorers in the draft. And we passed on both of them. Not passed, traded away a shot at taking either of them. I just do not understand it. Why not just get rid of Branham and get rid of Blake Wesley? Don't pick up their options. Pick Dillingham at 6 or at 8. Pick Knecht at 8. Keep them and develop them. And if it doesn't work out, so be it. What really is the value of a 2031 pick, right? Here's what they're thinking, right? They're thinking the Minnesota Timberwolves are all in on winning now. So in 7 years, 7 years when this pick comes to fruition, right? We're trading them away for a damn 6th grader. In 7 years, there's a chance, and I'll concede the idea that there's a possibility that Anthony Edwards is no longer on Minnesota. I think that's very unlikely, the way deals are being structured, the way super teams are being discouraged now. I think guys are going to be staying longer. Anthony Edwards, if he is in Minnesota at that time, will be 29 years old. There's not a soul who watches NBA basketball who would possibly believe that Anthony Edwards is not going to be a top 5, if not top 2 or 3 player when he's 29. He's already close to it, right? So you're now getting a first-round pick in 2031 that is very likely to be in the range of 20 to 29 to 30, 20 to 30, right? The bottom third. So you give up an 8th overall pick, mind you, in a draft that's not great. One of the more down drafts, although we don't really know what the draft is till it comes to fruition, for a pick in the 20s, more than likely, right? Best case scenario, right? Like maybe we get the same pick. Because, it's unprotected, but even if you're in the lottery, it's just a crapshoot, right? You don't really know what you're going to get the way it's structured now. Look at Atlanta getting the first pick this year, right? Like 1% chance. So I understand wanting draft capital down the line, but it's just not valuable. It makes no sense from a value standpoint. And then you look at it the same way with the pick swap. You can look at it twofold. You can look at it one way, which is if that pick for 2031 ends up being in the 20s and late, then the 2030 pick is going to be in the same realm as well. Well, the Spurs at that point if they're not a contender, what does that pick really matter? Right? What does that pick matter? And if they are a contender, what are they going to be swapping Minnesota with? Right? Like if Minnesota is still a contender and the Spurs are not a contender, which would be worst case scenario, you're going to have a better pick than them anyway. It's not going to be worth anything. If they happen to be worse and you happen to be a contender, yes, I guess. So it's just a big gamble in the sense that you're giving away an 8th overall pick and a possibility of adding to a young roster right now who's trying to get better for something that could end up being completely worthless down the line. I thought the value in it was one of the worst trades I've seen on draft day in a long time from a value perspective. I could be proven wrong. I'm not saying I'm all right here. It's just my view. My view is that I would never have done that. If you need that draft capital, I mean, we have so many picks down the line. If that pick is valuable down the line, we're probably not very good. So I just did not like it whatsoever. The other picks the Spurs had, they picked at 35, and they initially took Johnny Furphy out of Kansas, but immediately traded him to the Indiana Pacers. And really what happened was the Spurs traded from 35 to 36. The Pacers went up one to make sure they got Furphy, who they liked. The Spurs traded back, got some cash in return, and then they drafted Juan Nunez. I like Nunez from what I've seen on film. I don't know enough about him to say, oh, he's going to be a great player or he's going to be a terrible player. But from what I've seen, I really like his game. Good passer, high basketball IQ. He's a lefty, which I like. Very crafty, smart player. Not a great shooter yet, but I could see him developing into a shooter. I could see this guy being, playing a backup role on the Spurs. I like the Nunez pick. Of the guys at that point left, when we first drafted Furphy, I thought that was a good pick. I liked him. I think he's got some potential. But trading back to Nunez, we need guards. We need a point guard, especially now that we didn't draft one, because Castle right now at least is not a point guard. And so I get it. Going point guard here, I like that pick better than what we did at the 8th pick. And then the other guy we got was Harrison Ingram. We took him at 48 overall, 18th pick of the second round. He's a 6'5" kid out of North Carolina. Really improved his shooting over the course of the season. Got better. He's is he a guy that's going to come in and be on the roster? Probably not. Probably a two-way guy. Maybe spend some time in the G League. We'll see how he does in Summer League and in camp. But, not a bad guy to have. He's got a 7-foot wingspan and shot 40% from three last year. That's a nice little weapon to have, to be able to shoot and have that length. He can defend. So I like Harrison Ingram that late, worth a shot. But that's all I got for this breakdown of the San Antonio Spurs 2024 draft. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you think the Spurs made a big mistake trading away Rob Dillingham? Do you think we should have taken Dalton Knecht? Do you like the trade? Tell me what you think below in the comments. Again, if you like this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Give us a thumbs up. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll catch you guys next time. Also, check out my full draft preview of the entire NBA draft on this channel as well.